segment of the show for today. The guest is Dr. Bobby Lovett from Tennessee State University, and the topic is the 150th year commemoration of the Civil War, or the sesquicentennial of the war. And of course, Dr. Lovett, let's talk about members of the sesquicentennial heritage foundation that you're working with.
Well, the Sesquicentennial Commission consists of a large number of people from cross sections of Tennessee. I served on that for perhaps a year, but I'm no longer on that. But it's under the Commissioner of Tourism, and she has done a marvelous job in making sure that this celebration in Tennessee, this commemoration, is inclusive. And then there is the Tennessee Civil War Heritage Committee, which I serve as an advisor on the advisory committee headed by Carol Van West of MTSU. Those two committees are very important in pushing this commemoration across the state of Tennessee. And I think Tennesseans are going to learn that Tennessee was very much involved in this historic event, especially by 1864 when the Battle of Nashville was fought in December 15th through 19th, 1864, which Tennessee historian Stanley Horn says was one of the decisive battles in the Civil War. It was a turning point. And at the end of 1864, when people were tired of the war, the Union needed a victory, and the Confederates tried to retake Nashville as a strategic city. And the commanding general, George Thomas, collected about 42,000 troops here, and including maybe as much as 10,000 of them were United States colored troops, or what we call USCT. As you know, we have a commemoration each year in December on Kwame Lillard and others out at the National Cemetery on Gallatin Road. To remember what those men did, those African-American soldiers and others, because there are almost 2,000 black Civil War soldiers buried in the National Cemetery on Gallatin Road next to Kmart. And that kind of ended the Confederates' real efforts. From then on, they're on the run. And on January 31st, the House of Representatives proposed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. And the House of Representatives passed the proposal. The Senate had already passed that proposal in December at the end of the Battle of Nashville. And on February 1st, Lincoln is so happy, he says, that is a king's proposal. That sums the whole thing up. Because what he wanted was a permanent amendment that would put his Emancipation Proclamation in stone. And as you know, Lincoln was assassinated the next April, 1865. But prior to that, on the 3rd of April, Lincoln is able 4th of April, Lincoln is able to visit the Confederate capital because General Lee says to President Davis, you better get out of here, we can't hold it anymore. They evacuate Richmond. Lincoln arrives on boat with his son Tad. A black carriage driver escorts him through Richmond. On the approximately the same day, and this is some of Lincoln's doing, black soldiers are the first to enter Richmond and stand sentry at the Confederate White House as a symbol. He
That's
wanted
an irony, isn't that something?
He wanted to make it a symbol. Slavery is over, and black people had a lot to do with the ending of it. So among General Grant's 100,000 troops, 25,000 of the Army of the James are black soldiers under General Grant outside Richmond. And he tells the white soldiers to stand aside, and they stand aside, and the black soldiers come up front so that they will symbolically be among the first to enter the captured Confederate capital, Richmond, Virginia. Slavery is over. The war is over. The Union, of course, has been restored, maintained, and blacks had a lot to do with it. That's why they're going to owe blacks the 14th Amendment to make them citizens, the 15th Amendment, 1870, to give them the right to vote, and they're basing it on these blacks made a tremendous sacrifice to save the Union and to end slavery. 200,000 of them served in the Union Army, 20% of all Union soldiers, and 20,000 African Americans served in the Union Navy. So they were saying and protesting at the end of the war, we have a stake in being citizens. For the first time, the United States does something unusual. It passes the 14th Amendment in 1868, making all persons born in the United States citizens. Doesn't mention race, but it means that the former slaves ought to be citizens too. Whereas, remember, they had taken Native Americans and placed them in reservations and would not make them citizens, you know. But overnight, blacks became citizens of the United States as a result of the Civil War.
And so in a real sense, when we commemorate this war, it's almost impossible to eliminate the African participation. That is the
Almost impossible.
Almost impossible.
That's right.
And that nobody in reality really gave the African race citizenship or political rights. It's something that, in a real sense, I think you've demonstrated here that they actually earned.
As is erroneously taught in a lot of Southern history books. In fact, which leave out the fact that black soldiers were among the first in the captured city on April 3rd, 1865. And as you know, a few days later, April 15th, Lincoln died after suffering a gunshot wound on the night of April 14th. But that amendment, the 13th, was passed December 18th, 1865. And then 3 years later, of course, the 14th Amendment and then the 15th Amendment. Those three amendments, the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, as a result of the Civil War, completely revised the Constitution of 1787. We also forget that the Constitution of 1787 is revised completely by those three amendments.
The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. It makes it
if the founding fathers, if the founding fathers saw the Constitution of 1870, they wouldn't recognize it.
Not only would they not recognize it, they probably would not approve of it, according to what you yourself have said in reference to the Declaration of Independence.
Well, some would. George Washington, the father of the country, would approve. He was the only president that upon his death in 1799, December 1799, his will freed all 124 of his slaves. And Washington did that to set a precedent for the country. We got to solve this problem. And they didn't heed him. And as a result, we had Civil War in 1860.
And of course, I think locally, we generally celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation. That is the coming of January 1st and et cetera.
1863.
I'll make some statements in reference to the attitude that Africans must have taken when it started coming around from between September and January the 1st, when there was some uncertainty in reference to whether or not the South would.
Well, many African Americans celebrate January 1st as Emancipation Day because that is what started it all, when Lincoln issued his executive order. But as you know, executive order disappears after a president is gone. So, but Lincoln did push to get the 13th Amendment proposed, and he did get that done before he died, and then it was passed. But few of us celebrate the real date, which is December 18th, 1865. That's the day that the 13th Amendment was ratified. And that's the day that slavery was really abolished all over the country. Some from Texas celebrate June 25th, 1865, because the Texans didn't find out that the Emancipation Proclamation had been passed until the Union Navy arrived at Galveston, Texas.
As Texans are.
And they still celebrate something called Juneteenth. But really, Lincoln had issued it 1863, and then the real date for all of us really is December 18th, 1865.
Finally, do you find individuals to be somewhat excited about the commemoration, the 150-year commemoration of this war?
Not the youngest generation, and we talked about that recently at a meeting over in Murfreesboro we've got to do more things to educate teachers, and teaching materials are being prepared. But to educate teachers so they can teach youngsters how important Tennessee was in the Civil War. So that's one of the tasks of this SESQ Centennial Commemoration.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Lovett, let me thank you for bringing by that excellent information, as you generally do. And of course, let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.